The number of people sitting around the table who are not yes or no. The race has spoken long as first was a connection with its council. I still don't know a whole number of people. So we start introduce ourselves. What's the state?
No, my name's Vice Chair.
I'm Julie Davis, Cabinet Member for Communities and Civic Money. Derek Lavina, Project Manager.
Alexis Corporate Health and Civic Money. I'm Andrew Meek, Head of Resilience, Building Management and Safety. I struggle to remember actually.
I'm Karen G'day, Head of Employment, Reward and Transformation in HR.
Dan Paul, Chief People Officer.
I'm Jack Lee, Principal Committee Coordinator.
Please note that this meeting is recorded by the council from live and subsequent broadcasts via the council internet site. I'm not being by asked. Are there any apologies absent? It's always a council adding is going to be there.
Yeah.
Right, anyone else?
I haven't received any.
I mean, I think the urgent business.
No.
And has anybody got any special interest in the clear?
No.
Are there any petitions? No. Minutes of the last meeting appeared as 1 to 8 or 30. No, there's something about minutes of the 13th of April. You want to say about that? Yeah.
Should we agree that the minutes agreed from the 21st of February 2022?
Agreed.
I think Dan had a point of matters arising.
Yeah, if that's all right, Chair, if I might pick up just a point of matters arising from the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of February. It's marked as page 2 in my agenda. And on the second page of that, we had discussion at that meeting about my proposal to discontinue the consultant policy, it being out of date and, well, so out of date to render it unusable and not in line with the council's current way of procuring off-payroll workers. And I proposed we discontinue it. And at that meeting, members asked me to send round the policy and the recruitment policy and the recruitment policy guidance notes, which I did. And I didn't receive any comments back. So let me just, I'd like to propose again that we discontinue the consultant policy because it is out of date. We have provided in the people report, which will come later in the agenda, more data on agency workers, interims, and in particular, the higher paid agency workers. And we can only do that because of the officers following the new procurement process. If officers were to follow the process as set out in the consultant policy, we would not be able to provide that data, and it would, in fact, reduce transparency. So I just propose that we discontinue the current consultant policy because the arrangements are already laid out in the recruitment policy and the guidance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The only thing I would place what you say, there are no maximum arrangements for the minutes.
But no, it does say.
But where does it say maximum arrangement?
I didn't put matters arising in, but it's action arising from the minutes that I guess is best covered.
Have you seen this before? My point being that there's no maximum arrangement for committee minutes. But anyway, what you say is seems to be enemy sensitive, so perhaps we can agree that. Yes, Julie.
I think in the light, Chair, of the fact that we've got a significant change in the constitution of the committee, that this is something that we do want to keep under review. We know that members mind very much about excessive consultant use. So we're formally recording the fact that we have reviewed and rejected the old consultant policy, which was archaeologically established.
I'm not opposed, I guess.
And so what we're proposing is that the mechanism under which we review the use of consultants and comment on that is through the report that is automatically baked into the process of this committee's meetings.
I agree with that person. We've provided more data than people before, and we'll continue to provide that data. So that is the point of challenge, and that actually gives you more opportunity to challenge than was previously.
Okay, so that's, you got it, yeah. So,
So how often would you come back and we would look at that? Every meeting?
Every meeting.
Every meeting.
You provide the people report as a standard report for every meeting.
Which is full it, Chair.
this comes out of this one, just in case we have mentioned before. We want a new building. Yeah. Item 7, HR policy report. One of the first 9 on your.
I was going to introduce that one, Chair. Shall I
Yes, please.
introduce that? Just for the benefit of some members here, so we have a policy schedule that's been agreed in terms of our HR policies and the policies that we're due to review and look at, so that we make sure we're continually refreshing them. For this meeting, we were due to bring 2 of these policies here, so the reference policy and the conflict of interest policy, and in addition, we've got a new policy as well. So I'll introduce perhaps all 3 of them, and then happy to talk in any more detail about any of those 3 policies. So if we start with one that's down on the policy for Appendix A, it's our supported volunteering policy. So this is an idea that our new chief executive has championed, and it introduces 3 days paid leave in a rolling basis on a 12-month basis for employees to have time off for volunteering within the borough, so only within the borough. Very much part of our Haringey First commitment and our sort of co-creation and with the community, recognising the value that volunteers bring to our borough, and also the skills that we can develop, either new skills or existing skills, and working collaboratively with communities. The leave can be used individually or as a team, and it's really for us to really focus on that sort of reconnection with our residents. So this policy establishes that leave. We'd then be recording it, and we'd have a supporting mechanism to sort of advertise some of our volunteering opportunities if people don't naturally know about them. And this is obviously a policy that would be strongly promoting, and our chief executive said that he wants to be involved in that rollout of that promotion to really encourage that connection. So that's our first policy. Does anyone have any immediate questions on that one?
This is a short question. There's been for years a tradition of special constables related to police. If you were a special constable, would you be able to get sufficient time off to carry your duty?
So anything that relates to public duties, so we have people in sort of magistrates or school governors, those kind of things. So anything that falls under that, that's a separate policy. So that's in addition to this. So anything that falls under public duties is separate. So you're still entitled to that leave.
So where would I find those policies?
So we have a separate leave and time off policy, which would set out all the other different types of leave.
Okay, thank you.
We can circulate it to Councillor Rice if you'd like to.
Okay, really.
If you can look at 6.4 on page 11, I've got a feeling that's migrated from the references policy. Am I right? I'm just proving here that I've actually read it.
That's part of the covering report, Councillor.
Sorry.
Rather than the policy itself. So you've got a covering report, and then
Read it that
It's
close.
an appendix, isn't it?
yeah, then starting on page 13 is the policy itself.
Okay, so it's another example later on where the paragraph is shifted, so that's suspicious.
So the cover report covers all 3 of them. So that's no confusion.
Please. Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just to say that, I'm quite excited we've got this in place. It's really quite refreshing. I know a lot of organisations have sort of shifted in the last sort of 10 to 15 years in terms of the value of reconnecting organisations to the local sort of community. So I think for organisations like Haringey, it's great that we've got that in place. I had 2 small questions. One was in relation to, you spoke about advertising and marketing it and sort of making it aware to sort of staff and colleagues across Harrogate, but are there any sort of ideas in terms of proactive volunteering offers? So for example, if there's an organisation that is in need of volunteers on a regular basis, or something quite iconic, like Ali Pally, for example. So not to make it very sort of mundane activities, but more exciting activities, but then you have a connection to sort of Harrogate. Is that part of the plan, to sort of give an offer rather than just to say you will make more advertise it passively and you will look for this information and somehow make yourselves aware of it, sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. I think we're obviously wanting advertising with our directors, assistant directors, heads of departments to encourage them as teams to do that. I've had some initial discussions with our sort of area team who come to volunteering as well, and looking for some of those connections. And they've also offered to put me in contact with some local bodies as well. So my first point of call is to get this approved so that I could then say, look, this is what our offer is going to be. Also to talk to our internal communications, because they're our experts in promoting some of these things. So definitely that's something I want to do.
What we think we'll do, councillor, is have rather than put it in the policy, because these things change all the time, we'll have an intranet page or something similar where there are opportunities that we have linked from places across the council.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's something I support. This is great policy. I'm just wondering about when you're wearing different hats. So you work for the council, you go and volunteer somewhere. Are you expected to, it's about managing expectations, something, because you're going there to volunteer, whether some people would expect you to be actually bringing your Haringey hat to the table. That makes sense.
It does, and I think that's all part of that managing expectations piece, isn't it? And back to what I've said about the skills, if you're bringing, so I could go out and perhaps do some HR skills, or I could go out and do some DIY skills, and hopefully you'll be able to tell which one of those I'll be better at delivering. So I think it's around setting those expectations up front about what you're going to deliver. But very much this is about volunteering circumstance. So we have to provide some sort of support on that.
So using that example, if you went out and used your HR skills, and then, the HR skills, I mean, you will probably provide expert, but, probably say, well,
absolutely.
You said that, but actually, this is the situation. How do we, I know I've just seen, that's my brain works, because I just.
No, and we do say if there's DBS requirements, for example, or there's insurance, those should be held by the organisation you're volunteering for. So that's to manage that sort of segregation of duties, if you like.
I guess what we're saying is it's an interesting balance, because let's say we went into some HR work for a voluntary organisation in Harrogate, they would expect us to use our skills. Because that's what we're doing to benefit that organisation. But there does have to be a limit to that, because we're not an employee of theirs. We're providing volunteering advice, not professional advice that they can then rely on later, and we end up being witness to the tribunal. We don't want that sort of thing. So it's a balance.
I think a good example would be if a member of our legal department went and volunteered somewhere, I don't think they could offer legal advice on that basis.
No, lawyers say that's what my brain.
No, I mean, lawyers in particular have professional restrictions on who they can give advice to and on what basis.
I think any support for insurance. If you went to start advising people in voluntary organisation, their insurance cover you, or would the council insurance cover you?
It's their insurance. So I think we cover that in the policy actually. So it would be the insurance of the organisation you're volunteering for. So the council's commitment is to give the employee time off to volunteer. So that's where the commitment ends. After that, it's the voluntary organisation.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. And there are no sort of restrictions in terms of the scope of what volunteering is defined as, is it? I mean, sometimes it's a bit of an odd question, but because it's, I guess for some people's case, if they have an ongoing commitment and they might want to use those 3 days allocated to that activity, has that been considered or thought?
So we put some ideas in the 3.2 around it contributing to the individual's personal development, contribution to the objectives of the borough plan, and also supporting our social value objectives and benefiting the organisation. So it's very broad, but we've set up some boundaries there.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
just to ask, are careful records going to be kept on people's files? Because obviously it's important to, you might want to put it on references, for example, if you've got an employee who's been volunteering. So it should be recorded on each employee's individual file, the type of volunteering that is undertaken and how many days they gave.
We'll be recording it on HR's payroll system, so that will have there, so we'll have that, and obviously we'll have the email that attaches to that.
Any more? Okay. What we asked to do with this?
So for that, that's asking for that to be approved.
Can the policy be approved?
Three.
So,
Introduce the second policy, which is the conflict of interest policy, so that's appendix B in that paper. So the background to this policy is this is a recommendation that came out of an internal audit, which I think was carried out at the end of 2020, but the recommendations came out in 2021. One of the recommendations was that we had some guidance around our declaration of interest process, but it wasn't a policy, so there was a recommendation that we should establish it as a firm policy. Our guidance also didn't cover agency workers. This policy now widens that brief, and also sets out more formal requirements for a reminder to do that. So for our senior staff, we're required to do it every 2 years. Reminders for other staff to do this declaration every 2 years, or when the circumstances change and there's a new declaration to be made. So this policy really is following the audit policy. Audit have looked at that and are happy with as that as an outstanding action and completing that one.
what's the subtle difference between a conflict of interest? Sorry, Julie, look at
Just a couple of things. There was an example about on 4.3 examples of situations that may cause actual or potential conflict of interest, and it's just a technical thing. An employee staff invited to become chair of government is elected as chair of government, and then there's a section 9, undertaking additional work, and this is there are some. I think there are things in here that under 9.1, paid work and unpaid voluntary work. Carrying out any additional paid work and unpaid work is not permitted when you're on sick leave or on suspension. I mean, it's very serious disciplinary matter if you're on sick leave or suspended and you undertake work. So I think that not permitted is a bit. They're also, because it's beneficial if you're getting sick pay and you're getting some proportionate amount is state benefits, then you're actually working at the same time. So I'm not. I thought as well that the issue about undertaking additional work was not just about conflict of interest, but actually about the fact that you might not be giving as much to the day job as, because this isn't just 3 days a year of volunteering. This could be, several evenings a week or your day off, so you should be upfront about it because it might affect performance. And I just wondered if this reflected that. And then on that point, at the top of page 26, that was the paragraph I couldn't. It's there as an example of conflict of interest, and it seems to me that it kind of migrated from the undertaking additional work outside of working hours. That long paragraph at the top of page 26. I can't see that as a conflict of interest scenario, whereas all the others are.
I think it's the first sentence, Councillor. that indicates that there might be a conflict of interest. So it's an example of situations that may cause actual potential conflict of interests. So as the first sentence, if an employer requests permission to undertake additional paid work outside their contracted working hours, that might constitute conflict of interest, which is why we have a process to consider it. And then there's an example given there of where it might not, generate conflict of interest.
What that seems to me to be doing is talking about the likelihood of getting it granted. I mean, if the paragraph said something like an employee requests permission to take on additional paid work outside their contracted working hours, this should be discussed with the line manager to explore whether there are potential conflicts of interest. But my overall point about it is that it's stretching. It could be stretching somebody to a point where they wouldn't be doing the council job very well. But I could see if I thought some of that sort of didn't belong in there, didn't fit. Whereas the others were all quite clear examples.
Oh, I can see the point.
And I think we're trying to say, obviously, if someone's part-time, with us, they're doing 20 hours and 2 part-time. So we're trying to, I think we were trying to say it's not a complete no. I completely agree with your, working time directives and well-being, but there might be circumstances where actually that might be appropriate. So to try and say, this is where it might not be appropriate, and this is where it might be appropriate with that discussion. We can look at the word.
I think that's I've come across it with teachers and the requirement to just tell the manager that that's happening, so that all of those aspects can be explored.
We agree that.
So I can make that minor amendment.
Employment reference policy.
Yeah. So this is a policy really around, for me, it's around maintaining and containing our risk. So at the moment, we don't have a references policy that's published, which means that varying degrees of references could be provided. We do have a standardised system, so that HR should be providing them, but in the absence of a policy, it does mean that there is a risk there that we need to manage. What we want to be doing is making it clear that HR provide all references, and we provide it in a standard way, which is normal for employers at the moment in terms of mainly date confirmation. Obviously, we mentioned if there were safeguarding issues or anything else that we needed to report. But to set out the clear standard and the approach for that, and also having a clear process. We don't provide references for agency staff, but now we do have a centralised agency bureau who can provide references. We can provide feedback on agency staff, and that agency bureau matrix can then provide the reference on their behalf because they're the employers. So we've set out the process within that as to responsibilities. If an individual still wants to provide a reference, a more detailed reference, then they will need to do that on a personal basis, so with no headed paper or make it clear from the personal emails. So really this is around setting out that process to make it clear to all managers and staff when they're providing references, but also to manage that risk in the absence of having a policy at the moment.
What's your question?
I just wondered whether there were circumstances in which it would be prudent.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, I wondered if it would circumstances under which it would be prudent for an employee to let the line manager know that they've given a personal reference. Yeah, I could just see that being a difficulty, and it would depend on the role of the individual in the organisation. Personally, if you were giving a reference for your nephew to being a captain of a football team or something, it wouldn't be terribly important. But if you were senior in the council in a particular line of work and you gave a reference or somebody in that line of work for another organisation, it could come back on the council, couldn't it?
I think that's why we're saying in that circumstance, it would be from your personal email address, it would be from you as on a personal basis, and reference from you to a colleague, it's a personal basis, it's not a work-related reference. So that could be, so Harrogate could provide a reference which confirmed the dates in that circumstance, and then if someone wished to provide a supplementary personal reference, so they wouldn't necessarily recommend that.
I mean, it just maybe something along the lines of employees should consider whether the organisation needs to know that they provided personal reference, just to sort of cover that off. And I couldn't find it in here. It may be here, and I've missed it. But the policy on if you do provide, if it's a professional reference that it's from within the organisation, that you give the person that you've written the reference for a copy of it, so that they can see what's been written. Is that standard practice?
An individual can request a copy of from the person who provided the reference. So I don't think it's a standard. That's the mechanism for getting that.
It's quite good practice, though. I mean, in again, from schools examples, the head gets asked to write a reference for a teacher that's looking for a job and puts it in the pigeonhole to say, this is what I said, so it's all out there and transparent. It just it would be a. I mean, is it worth doing something explicitly? Some copies of references are disclosable and can be requested by the employee.
That covered in under section 8. Sorry, section 8. On confidentiality.
Oh,
But there's nothing wrong with getting giving a friend reference, personal reference. I think if you're aware that the senior person in that department is not that good, or a genitive words, and not giving us individual reference. Is there something wrong with that?
I think it's more around a consistency of the reference. The risk that we have is that somebody can provide a reference and it might not be fair. It might not be a fair reference. It might disclose performance issues that they haven't even.
But this is just a personal.
If it's personal, that's why we're trying to set out the. So if you're providing on behalf of Haringey, then it needs to go through a step process. If it's a personal reference and it's factual and it's from you and your personal email address, then that is a mechanism you can use if you think that's
sorry to be awkward, but again, another example. If an employee leaves Haringey under the terms of the settlement agreement with an agreed reference, and an employee, another fellow employee, is then asked for a personal reference, that's a very difficult area, isn't it? Because the organisation is pledged only to give the agreed reference, and somebody who's worked with them and thinks their performance is fine could get a personal reference. You see, that's a sort of, I think there are issues about personal references.
Yeah, which is why we've got a section 7 on agreed references, and that's also one of the mechanisms for controlling that risk, because HR would have the agreed references, so we can then provide them. Whereas obviously if a name's given outside of that, we can't necessarily control it on a personal basis.
Yes.
So I'm just going to say, in effect, are we saying that essentially the only reference that holds any weight really is something that's on Haringey email, Haringey letterhead paper, professionally? That's the thing that holds any weight. Anything that's using a personal email, just a need. It's not really a weighty reference. Would that be a fair reflection?
I think there's a couple of things. So most organisations now only confirm dates. So when we're recruiting people, we just get date confirmation. Some agencies or headhunters or people that you're talking to might then like to supplement that with a personal reference just to give some flavour of the individual. So some organisations do that. and that they use it as a supplement, if you like. But the main reference that would be on the file, and then, you know, if there are any particular issues in terms of employment, for example, if the dates were wrong or anything like that, we refer back to that professional reference from the organisation.
Any more contributions? No? Okay. Dr. Major, that. We're on to item 8, people control. That's page 45.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say something? Yeah, could everyone just speak up a little bit, just for Councillor Williams and Councillor Isla Gosling and attending on? They can't hear everything that's being said, but if you can, don't worry if you can't. I'll shut the window so you can get the sound a bit better. Yeah, that was it.
People's report.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. This is me. So this is, as I outlined before, this is the regular people report that we will bring to every meeting of this committee so that you can track employment statistics, ask us any questions that you'd like to, and really keep your finger on the pulse of employment across the council. So what we do is we provide the same statistics each time and provide a commentary. So in the commentary, what we try to do is point out things that you may be interested in. So this time, the things I'd like to point out are that, as you'll see, the employment headcount has gone up by 0.3%, whereas the base pay has gone up by 3%. That's due to a backdated pay award. So that isn't employees being paid more. That's just a backdated pay award for all staff. So that explains that statistic. The agency worker percentage has remained relatively stable since the last meeting at 18.5%. I talked earlier about splitting out the higher cost of payroll workforce, and you can see that in Appendix A, where the third column down is off payroll workforce, interim and consultants, and you can see that there's a figure there now of 64. So that's the headcount of interims and consultants. The definition, there is no settled definition of consultants. So what that is off payroll workers who cost the council more than £500 a day. That's the definition. And the other thing that I thought I might point out to the committee this time around is the sickness rate. So the average per day rising steadily from 7.3 days per rolling year in June 2021 to 9.7 days in March 2022. And you can see that's a fairly steady increase across the period. Now, the main reasons for that sickness are, we've done some analysis, so the main reasons for sickness are COVID, stress, mental health, and other illness. Now, other illness is not particularly instructive in terms of how to manage the cause. So as a result, we have stopped using other illness as a reason for sickness. Our managers are now expected to pick from the fairly extensive, to be fair, list of options for illness. So what I would hope to see over the coming year is the number of, let's measure a rolling year. You will still see other illness for the next 12 months, but you should expect to see that reduce and expect to see other reasons for sickness increase. Even if the overall rate doesn't increase, you would still expect to see some specific reasons increase as other illness decreases, because that's the way it's going to work. And you would also expect to see over that period, over the coming periods, COVID reasons for sickness decrease. That is where sickness is in terms of sickness by directorate. The directorates with the highest levels of sickness, around about 13 days per rolling year, are adults and health and children's services. That is not untypical and is primarily linked to the features of the job in those particular areas. The lowest levels of sickness are in finance and in legal and governance. Again, linked to the work that is done in those areas. That's not to say that people in finance and legal and governance aren't allowed to get ill. They are. It's not to say they're not allowed to be stressed out mental health issues. They are. But the fact of it is that the highest levels of sickness are in adults and health and children's services. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, for introduction and take any questions.
Any questions?
I have very quick questions, thank you. In relation to apprentices, I know this is going to be probably a long running commentary on where we should be in terms of apprentices, but for the purpose of tonight, in terms of the figures, if you compare the December quarter to March, there's been a slight decrease in apprentices in environment and neighbourhoods. Slightly, that's quite slightly smaller than I thought it would be. Is there any way we can find out as to why that would be? And I'm asking in that particular area because I thought that's a potential area of really good growth in the future for apprentices. This is Councillor Davis on my right here, Parks Service. I've been on your, probably been on the case. So that's a great area of investment for sort of apprentices, and it's a great way to sort of build a career in terms of how we train those who are not in work or education and employment. I just a bit of natural area, but I'd be interested to see why the significant decline there. I know it's quite marginal in customer transformation resources, slightly more in adult and health, but any particular way we can find that out or track that?
Yeah, I mean, we track it through this. Bit of contextual information. When I arrived in September 2020, there were 19 apprentices across the council. So there has been a huge push on apprenticeships and making sure that we make the best use of apprentice levy and that we employ more apprentices who add an awful lot to our workforce. So there was a big push. And there was a big push, particularly in environment and neighbourhoods. These figures will move around. They have decreased this time as a result of some of the employees from that initial big push finishing their apprenticeship. So it's not that we haven't got apprentices, it's just a large lump finish their apprenticeship all in one go. So these figures will move around, but I know that directorates are very committed to apprenticeships. Indeed, the interim director of that area started at Haringey Council as an apprentice himself. So he's very focused on apprenticeships. I know we'll push it forwards. Apprenticeships, just so the committee is aware, includes both employees brought on specifically as apprentices and also existing employees taking on training which qualifies them for an apprenticeship. So there's bits of both there. There's new employees. There's also existing employees who are taking on workplace training which qualifies for an apprenticeship. So the numbers will move around. I can provide more detail on what apprenticeships people are currently undertaking. I'm very happy to circulate that.
Does this include Helen McDonough's 12, it can't actually, 12 parks maintenance people funded by the European Social Fund, which was an apprenticeship thing that Employment and Skills were doing before the election?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was quite, there's been a real effort to get European Social Fund money out of the door, and that was such an imaginative idea to get 12 young people to train them in parks maintenance and put them on a course at Capel Manor. If there are 12 of them, then either two of them have left or they've not been included.
It's possible they haven't been included. I don't know when that programme was. This data is as at March 22. So if it was after that date,
this is probably before.
So you'll see it reflected in the next figures.
And do all the apprenticeships lead to employment, permanent employment?
Not necessarily, and that's obviously the aim. It will be all too easy to go out and employ loads of apprentices and say we've done a great job with loads of apprentices here, and then have no permanent job at the end of their apprenticeship. So we don't guarantee a job at the end of the apprenticeship, but it is a definite focus to move people from apprenticeships into employment, which is why we don't just focus on volume of apprenticeships, because if we did, we would potentially have to let really good people go at the end of their apprenticeship. So we make sure it's sustainable. So there's no guarantee, but we obviously try very hard, and we do have vacancies all the time. We're a big organisation, so we'll look to bring apprenticeships on. The other point I'll make about apprenticeships and indeed about this whole report is that on the 1st of June, we achieved these 750 new employees in from homes for Haringey. So when you next see these figures, in all areas, they will look very different. So the comparability of these figures following that will be effective for everyone.
Is that all it was? I thought it was about 900.
750 employees, 900 posts.
Oh.
Some of which are-
Are there any direct recruitment of apprentices from schools?
We recruit apprentices. I don't know if we recruit directly from schools. I don't know the answer to that. I'll check, find out for you.
Yes.
Just on the issue of housing or former housing staff, is there any more detailed report in the next committee about the nature of that staff that have come in from Homes for Harrogate? Because some of the things that I'm led to understand that there's significant vacancies in certain areas. We could understand, what the reason, how they're feeling, first of all, how they're coming in, what their thoughts are, does the transition, is it smooth, was it not smooth, what things they like, they didn't like, but also what the issues that we can address, that Homes for Harrogate could address. So I don't know if there's a scope for us to address. There's time basically that you made the next committee to discuss that. That's a significant amount of staff coming in overnight. That's a big challenge for the organisation. It'd be nice to have a paper on that in the future. Next committee to talk about that sort of cohort in particular.
What I suggest there, Councillor, is that we perhaps ask the interim director and the director for housing.
Relevant person.
Thank you. The director names have just changed, and I just can't get the new ones. It used to be called Housing Regeneration and Planning. If anybody can help me with the new name of the director.
I'm not sure it's technically changed yet, so you might stick with that.
Thank you. So we can ask the director of environment, neighbourhood, goodness, housing regeneration and planning, who has received the majority of the employees from Homes for Harrogate, to come along and talk about that, this committee, perhaps provide a report. That might be what we'll tell you. Yeah.
Yes, thanks so much.
Any more questions on this point? No, there's not. Shall we move on to item 9? Sorry.
Sorry, Richard. Just looking at the figures, so you've got the off payroll workforce agency, sort of data sort of going up, and those excludes the 500 plus people. But the 500 plus people, you don't have a arrow going up or down, or have I been?
No, I see your point. It's because they're being just reported for the first time.
Okay.
This time,
Right. So next time they'll have an arrow up, down,
up or down.
in the same.
And just to be clear, if you see in the second group of figures, you'll see off payroll workforce agency costs annualised in thousands, and June 2021 is 39.9 million, and March 22 is 32.688 million. So what you need to do to make the figure directly comparable at this point is add 32.6 to the 7.560 million on the table below. So it's broadly, so that's why I say it's broadly comparable to a year ago, because 40 million is comparable to 32.5 million plus 7.5 million.
Okay.
So that's why I say it's broadly.
Okay.
Any more? Can we note that report, please? Item 9, workforce and welfare strategy, further pages 51 to 84.
Thank you, Chair. So the report asks the committee to approve the implementation of the workforce wellbeing strategy. As an employer, we have a duty of care to the staff that work at Harringay, and therefore we have to support their wellbeing. A good wellbeing strategy has several benefits, both for the employer and for its staff. The idea is that we have a more inclusive workforce, improve performance, improve productivity, better retention and motivation amongst staff, and a workplace with lower sickness absence as well. And the workforce wellbeing strategy is one key way that we can achieve one of our borough plan outcomes, to be a healthy and resilient workforce. And it's also a good way of being an exemplar of good practice in the borough to other organisations and also for other local authorities. The vision for our workforce wellbeing strategy is that we the Harringay Council to be a compassionate, respectful and inclusive workplace where staff wellbeing is protected, promoted and supported, And the strategy focuses on 5 key priorities, which we've developed through a mixture of looking at the London Healthy Workplace Award, as well as academic literature, as well as some of the information from the ONS. And so we have a sort of overarching priority, which is the corporate support for wellbeing, and then 4 others which sort of sit on top of that, which are around mental health and wellbeing, physical health and wellbeing, economic wellbeing, and then interpersonal and community and social wellbeing. And so it's a really broad understanding of what wellbeing is, which goes beyond the sort of physical and mental aspects that I think lots of other sort of wellbeing initiatives consider. And it's also very pertinent, I suppose, in our current climate with the cost of living crisis, that we've taken this commitment to look at economic wellbeing of our staff. We aim to address 6 key challenges within the strategy. We want to make sure that wherever our staff are working, they have access to good wellbeing support, that we have wellbeing as part of our workplace culture, and that we make sure that we can engage with all our staff, be they working out in the community or in our offices. There's a real commitment to EDI as well in this strategy. Like I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we can address current sickness absence levels compassionately and appropriately, and that we do all that with value for money. And the strategy also contains a corporate action plan with the intention then that directorates would develop their own wellbeing action plans as well, that focus on some of the key wellbeing challenges in their own areas. We've developed this strategy through extensive engagement and consultation with staff networks, with unions, with Homes for Haringey, who are now obviously in-house, and with other teams and staff across the council. And this builds on our prior workforce wellbeing strategy, which ran to 2018, with which we got an excellence award through the London Healthy Workplace Award, which is obviously what we would hope to do again. And we've picked up the wellbeing strategy work again following the disruption that COVID sort of gave to our workforce, and have incorporated elements and challenges from that into our current strategy.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? You.
I think this is great. I mean, I saw a lot of this in the previous role, and I think that we're, it's all really constructive and precisely the sort of thing that we should be doing for the workforce. This is just a sort of a point. I'd really like it if there was more about women in here. It would make up more than 50% of the workforce, and it's one sentence. And there are other people, other groups get whole paragraphs. So that was on page 69 under their sex and gender reassignment. I think it's important to take those two, separate those two things, because women are more likely to experience sexism in the workplace, to struggle with things like domestic violence, childcare, not just unpaid care work. They have, there are lots of reasons why a woman's well-being might be impacted at work, and we've done a lot on it. We've introduced the menopause policy and various other family-friendly policies. So it's a bit disappointing to see us all squeezed into one sentence again, and everybody else getting whole pages about what they're going through. So, is there a way that the feminists expect to be happening?
I'm sure we can get it beyond a fragment of a sentence, at least a paragraph. Yeah, thank you.
Particularly juggling childcare, that is so. It can have such a terrible impact on a female employee. Being and missing out on the social side of being at work, and not knowing if you're going to be told off for leaving work early, because it's always women who have to go and pick up a child from the nursery, isn't it?
Yes, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say I really welcome the inclusion of economic well-being. I think when you think about a lot of people that I know working in local government, not necessarily Haringey or clarification. I mean, one of the things I didn't like is the traditionally they say that the security of the job is always the big thing, but nowadays as cost of living, pay packets are being really, sort of squeezed, and the vast majority of staff are on low wages or on sort of regular, ordinary, mean wages. So I think anything we can do more sort of support this kind of people, especially really frontline workers in particular. So I think the more we can sort of communicate all the benefits that are available, of which don't claim they're entitled to, that's probably how it might be a cultural British thing. We just, don't want to be inconvenient and difficult. But I think it's about really making them aware that they are entitled to a number of benefits of being employed as the council as well. And I think anything we can do to really emphasize that part of the strategy, because I do like, that's quite unusual, I have to say. Most of the strategies come across don't mention economic well-being. It's the physical, mental well-being, are you happy at work, the interpersonal relationship with your colleagues, that kind of thing. So I really do welcome that. In terms of going forward, how do we then sort of materialize that? So now we've got this in place, and we've got real key sort of measures, you could say. How do we sort of measure ourselves against our well-being? This is all strategy, this is an audit, this is sort of review that will be happening maybe a year in, or 2 years in. I'll be keen to understand that. And the other thing I'll be keen to understand is just anecdotally, what are some of the things you have from staff or colleagues, what are they saying in terms of how they're feeling at work, and how they sort of are, political supportive. They feel that we're listening as an employer, are we a sort of a critical friend of an employer and says, oh, structural things we might not get right, we're very keen to address and acknowledge them. I'll be keen to understand that. That is my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up some of those. So thank you firstly for the very positive comments about economic well-being. That really came from the feedback that we got when we got the Excellence Award, which from the London Healthy Workplace Charter. They said, well, you've done very well, but in common with most organisations, it wasn't clear that it was really reaching the frontline staff in the way that it should. So we took that as very sort of seriously and thought, well, how best can we listen to those workers and find out what their concerns are, and because there is a risk of having a kind of white collar well-being strategy, and we didn't want that. So so we've done some work to define measures for. And I don't think we've confirmed a kind of reporting cycle for it, but I think annually is a kind of sensible frequency for us to come back and provide the data that we can against those measures. So I'll allow it to go into the minutes that will come back in a year's time with an update. And then in terms of kind of next steps, so firstly, we're already in the process of going to each directorate management team and rolling out the strategy, explaining it, and asking them to set up their own wellbeing groups to get the process moving. And we're setting up a central steering group, which Karen is going to be on, Dan's involved in, Alexis, so you've probably got most of the steering group here. And we're also going to create a kind of a wellbeing hub on the intranet. But we're also kind of conscious that we need to make sure that anything that we put centrally on the intranet also actually is accessible to staff who are not directly accessing the intranet every day. So that's part of that kind of engagement process with the directorates to understand what's going to work in different. The best way to reach parks operatives is not going to be the same as how best to reach kind of travel buddies or different employment groups are different. We need to individualise it as much as possible. And then in terms of how people are feeling, I think that's a difficult question to answer sort of in very general terms, and Dan might be able to say a bit more about the surveys that we're going to be doing, to try and get more sort of formal feedback on that. I suppose if I'm just being sort of anecdotal, I think people are went through a period of really feeling exhausted by the pandemic. I think that we've got this sort of a kind of there's definitely a mental health sort of hangover from that. Perhaps it's starting to kind of mitigate a bit because the further we get out of it, people start to kind of recover. But I think it's affected different people very differently. So there's a lot of kind of individual stories that can be quite varied. How do people think of Haringey as an employer? I would like to think they generally think that we're a good employer, and that does seem to come across that most people's experiences of working at Haringey are generally positive, but they're also there are always people's relationships with line managers, etc., who colour that very strongly. So it's I think it's dangerous to generalise too much.
Any further comments on that? So then we approve the well-being strategy for 22 to 25, yes.
Agreed.
Item 10, corporate health, safety, well-being statement policy.
Thank you, Chair. That's me.
Yeah,
The current corporate health system within policy is in the review. Incorporated these changes in the structure of the organization and to make sure it remains fit for purpose. But also the policy includes changing governance structure and accommodates the needs of hiring in the council. The recommendations are to approve the corporate health system policy statement, and also this point that is goes always with the policy is that if there's a minor change, then the chief executive officer, the chair, and the corporate health system will be involved to make those small changes and then bring them here for the next report. The reasons for the what has been updated in the policy is that we simplify the responsibility for managers. Because of the change in structure, we reflect these changes on the structure to the corporate leadership team. We bring the significant health sector well-being matters. We have stated there that my post supports the Director of Customers and Functional Resources. The corporate health sector will be on board as this post is the chair. We have clarified building safety responsibilities and acknowledged the insertion of Haringey, putting that a further revision of this policy may be required when we go through the transitional period into this organization coming in-house. And lately, the changes in governance in the membership of the corporate health sector will be on board to ensure that senior management accountability. Having a health sector well-being policy is a legal requirement, and therefore we must have one in place. And this policy goes over and meets the requirement for statutory duties, health safety and well-being statutory duties of having a safe work environment, safe equipment, information, instruction, training, and supervision of employees, supervision and maintenance of plant and equipment, and also covering a very specific aspect of mental health, stress, and well-being. In a nutshell, that is the review of the policy, which is it's not a new document, it's just a review that needs to happen there. So,
At one point I got the raise and it talks about authorizing the chief executive in consultation with the chair of the committee with the corporate health, safety and well-being board and with the corporate leadership team. Everybody else included in that. The odd thing. I mean, why does the chief executive need the committees directing what to do?
So the reason is because these changes follow the governance structure of the council that starts from consultation of employees to get into the corporate health safety and well-being board. That these are reported to council leadership team, which the chief executive officer is the one that agrees to those changes, and then we bring them to this board to ratify those changes in there. There's small changes in the policy.
But doesn't this not go to cabinet?
it's not on the governance structure.
right? I mean, I would have thought that the leader has been member of the cabinet. And if you think that'd be sufficient, you don't need half an army to be signing off, do you?
Well, I think if, you know, the extent of the consultation with you as chair is sort of a matter between yourself and the chief executive. I think that the proposal here is just that if we need to make some minor tweaks to the policy, that we just, you know, can do it and report it here. We let you know in advance, you know, so that you're aware that it's happened, and then you know, and obviously if there's something that you're not happy with, you can say I'm not happy with it. But then, you know, we can
I
make
can say that anyway, can you?
I'm sorry.
I can say that at any time.
Well, indeed you can, yes, of course.
I think so.
But, you know, this is setting out that, you know, we would delegate to the chief executive the ability to make those sort of minor amendments and then report them here to be ratified. And that just speeds up the ability to, you know, it's small adjustments. And it's, I think it's a relatively, I hope that's not too controversial. But the alternative is, of course, that any change we bring it here and we can do that.
Miss Davis, you want to come in?
I think this is properly with this committee because the council functions related to staffing are delegated to these are the residual functions of the council that are delegated to the staffing and remuneration committee. And actually it doesn't fall into the policy and executive and key decision area that the cabinet would have to take account of. I was going to make a separate point, and this is page 89, item 3. Once again, I just would like to see sex. I'd actually think it belongs with maternity leave and pregnancy, and that gender and gender is a very different thing from sex. So gender and gender reassignment is as a separate thing from sex, and sexuality. I'm just used to seeing it as sexual orientation, just as a, you know, just to sort of tidy it up. I think that's what it says in law anyway, sexual orientation.
Thank you. Councillor, small changes.
Just tidying that.
And I understand that colleagues in HR been looking at protected characteristics and redefining this in policy. And once they are there, probably we'll take those and incorporate them in here.
I mean, I think the stuff to do with the gender reassignment is really useful, and to have it spelled out. You know, the sort of effects of being in the workplace, the potential for prejudice and discrimination. It should all be there, and that's in line with our transport. But I'm always going to be in there fighting to have women's rights, and particularly relating to things like pregnancy, because it leads to career disadvantage, low pay, all of those things. A different set of potential disadvantages attached to that.
Yes, Councillor.
It's just a question on the policy review. Is there a reason why it's every 26 months? That's a very strange question. I'm asking that because from my limited experience again, when it comes to policy reviews, they're normally, especially in health and safety, I'm normally seeing at least 2 years. Because of the way some old structures, for example, the old construction site, I have to report to the HSE periodically, I guess, to sort of keep them up to date on what's happening inside. Is there a reason, is this because it's a very broad policy, it's not very traditional health and safety, it covers many other areas? Or?
We moved to 26, so when we are approaching the end of the policy, we got another 2 months to work, to do the work and go through the consultation process and review it before they expire.
Okay.
It's giving us 2 more months leeway to.
Okay, no, it's that. That's fine. Thank you. It's very helpful.
Right, are we going to leave this recommendation in terms of minor change in reporting to? Yes.
Just out of interest, what would be a minor change and what would be a major change?
Yeah, so there's a good question, which is very hard to answer in advance of having one in front of you to consider, and obviously there is a degree of discretion required, but I suppose, I mean, certainly if a change would be an adjustment to wording, which wasn't, materially affecting the effect of the policy.
But ultimately, you'll always come back to this policy committee here to ratify your.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
My problem is all these various groups of people who we brought. I mean, if it was authorised to see that they can be done to this year, would that not be sufficient?
I think what Alexis was describing was we could simplify it and say just between yourself, the chair, and the chief executive. It's worded in the way that it is because it also involves the chair of the corporate health, safety and wellbeing group, which is the director of customer transformation and resources. So that's why that post is specifically named, because they are the corporate officer lead.
I'm just saying, in consultation means, I mean, it can mean anything really. So it might still the decision will be taken by yourself and but I suppose it's a good idea to put it in front of them. They might have some.
All these other people?
I don't know what happens when it comes in consultation.
Yes.
Also, Chair, if I could say that there is a legal requirement to consult with employees in matters of health and safety, and the corporate health sector will be board ensures representation for that side. These changes, we consult with them as part of the changes of the policy.
All right, that's easy then. But safe and sorry.
Chair.
Yes, they agree that.
Agreed.
I think 11 is any other new business we've got now. The dates of the next meeting is Thursday, 20th of October 22, and Tuesday, 21st of February 22. That's not right, is it?
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Well, that should be 23, yes? All these new script at 7 p.m. And I'm not sure how long we're using this, but keep meeting.
There'll be a new meeting.
No?
There'll be a new venue for the next.
Okay. Where's the Ali Pali?
Really civic centre.
Sorry?
Civic centre.
Should we be so lucky? Right, can I thank you for coming and you can go and enjoy Wimbledon lots of rest of it. I mean, we can not be. Is she really?